Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and have a chat with you today, share some of the work that we're pushing forward in Wood Group PSN in the areas of knowledge management and innovation. The slides are more orientated towards the knowledge management piece, particularly how this can help gain competitive advantage and continuous improvement within the business. Just as a kind of introduction, I hope you can all kind of read this. Knowledge management is a term which sometimes becomes the butt of many business jokes. My own opinion, partly because I think a lot of people struggle to see the value from knowledge management. A lot of people or a lot of organizations try to implement this, and a lot of them tend to fail. I've had 10 years of experience working in the industry with many of the major oil and gas companies to see how they are doing this well or not so well. To help identify what are the key elements that we really need to focus on in a business to drive through knowledge management, tie it into business objectives, and make sure that we're delivering this continuous improvement element within the business. So just some funny Dilbert cartoons. If you've not seen Dilbert before, he's a cartoon comic that most business individuals tend to send around the office and have giggles and laughs at because it tends to represent a lot of the stuff they deal with in the business as well. So not the top one obviously, but the bottom one certainly is something that we come across. There tends to be a lack of standardization in most organizations. A lot of people trying to do the same thing and not communicating and connecting, repeating the work and reinventing the wheel in a sense, and something we need to get a hold of, and something that we're trying to do in Wood Group PSN as well. So just a brief introduction to the company, a standard intro slide. We're obviously part of the bigger Wood Group, who until recently was led by Ian Wood, who retired last week. We were acquired. The PSN part of the business was a standalone organisation, which was an offshoot from Halliburton and KBR. Production Services Network was the acronym. Last year we were merged with the organisation, so we form now the largest part of the group, around about 29,000 people of a large group, which is around 41,000 operating in 50 countries around the world. So I'm not going to read this off for you, but basically we can provide services from what we call greenfield, which is the design of new facilities offshore and onshore, through to the operations and maintenance of existing facilities, to modifications, improving production, etc., all the way through to decommissioning as well. So we're kind of full life cycle in that sense in the oil and gas industry. Every company has a mission, so ours is here at the bottom. I'll let you have a read of that, but we want to be the best company to work with, to work for, and have a relentless focus on continuous improvement. So the two areas that I look after, being knowledge management and innovation, all feed into this continuous improvement piece, and how do we get that relentless focus, and what are the things we need to do to achieve that. So although the kind of focus of this is on competitive advantage and how we gain that, if we're not very good at things like knowledge management, then obviously we put ourselves in a position of competitive disadvantage. We're unable to retain our critical knowledge in the organisation, pipeline engineers, electrical engineers with 30 years experience walking out the door, and we're not doing anything to retain that back in the business for reuse. It's obviously not a very good position to be in. If we can't learn the lessons that we're winning through our work, whether they be good or bad, again, we open ourselves up to a lot of negative impacts. And then obviously from a quality point of view, if you look at a lot of the ISO standards, they all have a clause in there that require you to be continually improving your processes and procedures through lessons learned, etc. So if we can't demonstrate we're doing this, we leave ourselves open obviously to non-conformities against that particular process. Some of the things that we can obviously see if we're not very good at this, and unfortunately these are things we see time and time again in the oil and gas industry: repeat incidents, negative impact on cost and schedule in terms of projects, reinventing the wheel, not repeating work that's been done elsewhere. Reputation is obviously a big thing, BP being the big thing a few years ago with Macondo. We all see the reputation impact that had on them. Intellectual capital loss, so again, we've got people that work in the business that we nurture and mature over a number of years, and we just let them walk out the door, so there's a lot of intellectual capital loss there. And then lost business opportunities. We're now seeing a lot of our customers asking time and time again, how are you learning your lessons? How are you delivering innovation to our contracts? We have to be able to be efficient and effective in doing that and demonstrate that with evidence that we can do that for them as a customer. Otherwise, we risk losing business in that sense. So to start at the beginning, what do we actually mean by some of these terms we're throwing around? Having been in the industry and this particular field for a number of years, I've come across hundreds of definitions of knowledge management, of innovation, of learning organizations, etc. But for me, what the important thing is what does it mean to our business? and getting standard footing on that sense. So when we're talking about knowledge management or lessons learned, everybody understands what we mean. It may mean something else in a different organisation, but what's important is what it means to us. So these are some of the standard definitions that we're going to be pushing through Woodbrook PSN in terms of what we mean by these terms. So when people are talking about them, they know what they mean. A lot of people talk about lessons learned without actually thinking what they're talking about. A lesson cannot be learned until you make a change in the business. You change the way you operate to learn that lesson, and you can see that happening on a global scale. Simply capturing lessons in a report or in a database does not mean you're learning them. Okay, so there is a clear distinction there. Same with innovation. It's another key term that's used quite freely in that sense. I like to think of it in terms of renovation and innovation. A lot of people call innovation things where they're updating or improving a process. It's not necessarily innovative. It's not new. It's not something creative that they come up with. It's just an improvement to an existing process. Innovation is something very different. We need to make sure that we're providing processes and stuff to achieve that. Knowledge management, obviously the key topic for today. So again, a lot of this is David Millar's view of the world. So you can read textbooks and some stuff you've maybe come across in lectures, and you may get slightly different terminology. But again, this is what it means to us as an organisation going forward. So it's around the processes and tools to continue to learn from individuals and teams. We want to make sure that we can implement and apply change across the board globally to improve. We want to find and reuse works of projects and go and ask about another project that's just completed to see what they've done in a design, reuse that and continually improve that if need be to improve the cycle times and cost, etc. on projects. And the biggest piece is how do we reduce our knowledge loss risk? Getting visibility of where our critical knowledge sits in our experts, how long are they from retiring, who's coming up behind them, and what are we doing to transfer that knowledge in a rigorous and systematic way over a number of years before they leave. So it's really, really important, particularly in this industry. So gaining a competitive advantage through knowledge management. So if we can do this right, if we can achieve this and get this implemented in the business, these are the kind of things that we want to be able to see happening. We want to reduce risk and continually improve our performance across all of our contracts with all of our customers. That includes safety, quality, integrity, operability, and the value that we're adding to our customers' business. We want our people to be connected. So one of the things we're trying to do is connect all of our individuals around the world that are relating to a particular function. So let's take the pipelines function. We want to make sure a guy in Australia can ask a guy in Aberdeen or Houston a particular question and know that he or she is leveraging that global knowledge to help him solve a particular issue or problem or come up with something new, creative that they can apply to their particular piece of work. We can transfer and retain our critical knowledge, and we can make sure that any lessons and new ideas we have, we can rigorously and systematically review them and apply them to the business to continually improve, and they're not just sitting in a report or somewhere, getting global visibility of this. So the ultimate objective for us particularly is faster sharing, learning and improvement about the way we work and the services we deliver. And we've broken down the FASTER acronym to say these are the kind of things we want to start achieving in the business. Quite simple, but these are really effective. We can actually get these in place in the business. This will have a huge impact for us globally going forward. Finding expertise, who are the people around the business that know about these particular things? We really struggle with this as an organisation, and a lot of companies do. How do we find them? Where do we go to do a search on a particular project or client they've worked for, or a particular area of expertise? Where can I go to ask people questions? Where can I go to know that I'm leveraging that bigger brain in Woodbrook PSN? Where can I go to share my lessons? I've got a new idea about something we can do better. How do I do that? Where do I go? Building the trust and relationships. So I know we had a conversation starting up. This is one of the most important things we need to work on, is the culture and the behaviours of the individuals that make up that culture. And starting to build the trust and relationships so people feel they can put their hand up and ask for help when they need to, and that you're happy to, in an open forum, offer your help and a solution going forward. Customer satisfaction goes without saying, improving the quality of what we deliver and the services we provide, and this relentless focus on continuous improvement, tying back to what the business wants, meeting that mission statement objective. So kind of some examples of the kind of the good and the bad. So in real life, for those of you that have kind of had visibility of the industry, BP Macondo, I'm not going to go into in any great detail. I used to work for BP while they were going through the big transition of centralizing everything into their kind of global organizations to move away from the silos that they had. There was a big piece in the report around not learning lessons. They were pointing fingers at various parts of the interfaces, the contractors that were working, the people that drilled, and all that kind of stuff. But I think as a whole, as an organisation, and the contractors that were working within that, again, they were really struggling with the lessons piece. How were we learning lessons? How are we making sure we're affecting change, and there's visibility of that? And obviously we saw the devastating effects that can have, not just on the asset or the lives that were lost, but also on the business as a whole. BP were very lucky to survive that. Another entity in the oil and gas industry who had an event in 2008 was a gas release from one of their floating production and storage units. This is a picture of an example. This is basically like an oil rig, but in a tanker for deep water. They had a gas release which shut down the plant, which then blew all of the inventory in the plant down the same route, which then created a huge gas cloud which blew back over the entire facility. There were 300 odd people on board at the time, very lucky it didn't ignite. But potentially they're saying if through the blast calculations, had that ignited, it would have pushed the entire accommodation block off into the sea with the majority of the people inside it. When they did the investigation, they went all the way back to the early 90s and came across 150 other similar incidents, which could have led to an improvement or a change in the design, which would have stopped that and many other incidents happening. And obviously came to the conclusion that we are not a learning organisation, we do not do this well, and we need to do something now to stop this from happening again. And unfortunately, this is something that I've seen happen in many organisations around the industry. The number of repeated mistakes across multiple projects within a company, let alone across the industry, is quite startling. And the other one is NASA. Probably well documented, some of you may or may not know, but there was a question raised by one of their technical engineers when they were trying to develop a new mission program. Somebody asked the question, well, how did we do this in the Apollo program? And nobody knew. Nobody knew where to go to find the lessons from the Apollo program. And they had to dig through hundreds and hundreds of reports to find the actual lessons that had been written in 1970, and nothing had been done with them. They'd been sat dormant and they hadn't moved through the business to make a change. So they now have a very effective and rigorous program now to tackle this within NASA. Example of the good. So a keen cyclist myself, so a British Sky team, maybe not one that's obvious to everybody, but this is an example of an organisation which applies knowledge management and innovation at its heart. So we knew, I don't know if anybody saw the documentary that was on Sky Team that kind of took you behind the scenes of what was going on. But Dave Brailsford, leader with a mission to achieve Tour de France victory in 5 years. He achieved it in 3. And the main reason they did this was, one, he had a clear drive and vision of what he wanted to achieve. He was surrounded by some of the best people, but he had a key focus on making sure that they drove learning into everything that they did. So they learned before doing, they went out, reviewed the course, they videoed it, they studied it, they had lots of data and stuff around it from previous cycles, from previous years, previous races. They analysed it to death, and they sit down with a team and they go through a strategy for what they had to do before they actually executed that activity, that race. They're continually gathering data during the race, so they're continually monitoring and analysing that, feeding back any changes to strategy to the team as required, and then they have a big learning debrief afterwards. They sit down and go, okay guys, what happened? What went well, what didn't, what do we need to change? Anything with the tools or the equipment or the strategy or your nutrition or whatever, and the results are there to see. An amazing achievement for Dave and the team. There were some innovations as well as part of that. So they had the bus. So they spent a lot of money on the bus, making sure it was a great environment for the guys to debrief in and relax. They had their own chef, so they had no problem with nutrition or any problem with the hygiene of hotels and things like that. And they had various other things as well, like they take their own bedding and change the hotel bedding out for their own bedding so they were in a comfortable environment and used to that kind of stuff. So it's a great example of, you drive this through to the heart of an organisation, what you can achieve. So in terms of what we're trying to achieve going forward, so I try to break down our mission statement where I see we fit in from kind of a KM and innovation perspective. So we say we want to be the best company to work for, so we want to retain the best people. We want the people to come and join the organisations and stay with us. We want to develop these into experts and potentially masters, which is something I'll discuss later. We want the best company to work with, so we want our customers to want and come and work with us. We want to be able to demonstrate repeatable excellence across all of our contracts and with all of our customers, and make sure that learning and innovation is part of the way we work. A relentless focus on continuous improvement. This has got to be in our DNA. This has got to be something that just happens as part of the way we work. It should not be seen as an additional task. And then our kind of knowledge management and innovation mission is kind of there below. So feeding on this relentless focus on continuous improvement, how do we do this? We better connect our people through global networks, and we become faster at sharing, learning, and improving. Very simple, very effective. So what are we going to do to achieve that? I'm not going to go into this in any great detail. Obviously, if you want more detail after this, my email address is at the end. I'm more than happy to talk you through some of this. But there's 8 critical elements we're going to focus on. This is based on my 10 years experience in this industry of seeing what people focus on, what they don't, what's missing, what works, what doesn't, and why. A lot of companies that try this and they seem to fail is because they focus on the process and the tools bit and forget everything else that's surrounding that, that's focusing on the people. How do we get the people to change their mindset and behaviours in relation to this and start to do this as part of their way they work? See the value add to their business, their product, their activity, for them as an individual, but the organisation as a whole, and what are we doing around that to help support that going forward. The learning process, as I said, as we discussed with Sky, we need to get to a point where we learn before, we learn after, and we're sharing those learnings back into the business through our global networks to make sure we affect change. This is really important. This has to be part of the way we work. Commonly in the industry, it's a capture point at the end of a project stage or at the end of a project, which is tick the box, you must capture lessons. We need to get away from that as an industry and start asking the question, what do we need to learn before we start doing this project, before we do this activity? Where have we done this before? Where have other companies done this before? How are we going to pull that in and start applying it? As well as capturing after doing and feeding that back to start to feed this loop going forward. Very important and key to the success of all of this. Knowledge retention process is something we're looking at, getting more visibility of our knowledge loss risk across the business. Where is that sitting? Who's coming up behind them? And what are we doing to transfer that? A standard term we see in knowledge management is 80% of a company's knowledge is in the head of its employees. And that will walk out the door if we don't do anything about that. So we must have an ongoing program of knowledge retention. It takes 7 to 10 years to become an expert in any given field, apparently. That's what they say, 10,000 hours of practice. But through some of the KM initiatives and through this knowledge retention process, you can actually reduce that considerably. And you can start to develop high potential employees into experts and potential masters as well. So you start to be seen as the industry as having retained the people that are masters in a particular area of the business. So again, there's a revenue opportunity through this as well as retaining critical knowledge and helping those new employees start to add value back to the business much quicker. Last slide, so how are we going to do this? How are we going to demonstrate excellence and how are we going to performance manage this in that sense? So we want to continually monitor how we're doing KM and innovation in the business, how efficient is the process, what's the culture like, what are we doing to improve that, focusing on those 8 particular elements. Looking at the efficiency, looking at improvement opportunities, looking at the knowledge loss and mitigation, and demonstrating our success. One thing we don't do very well is demonstrating success and shouting about it and communicating and trying to capture that around the business. Where have we done this well? And start to speak about that globally. Global standardization is key. So again, one process, one tool set, one way of doing this, and start to really develop the culture and behaviours around that. And culture. Culture is so important to the success of anything like this. Now, culture eats process for breakfast, as I heard one person speak about it. You can develop process and tools, the best in the world, but if the people are not engaged and willing to use them, it's not going to happen. So we have to have equal focus on the people and their behaviours as well. And one way of doing that is trying to measure our culture and our maturity on a 1 to 5 scale, which is ours here. So looking at where we are at level 1 inactive or where we're at level 5 excellence, and trying to progress through those levels as we kind of move forward in this journey of knowledge management and innovation. Right, so if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to contact me at any time. I'll be happy to help you out where I can.